You go to bed at 10 tonight, and your neighbor, the one who is 74 and still gardens every morning before you are even awake, she goes to bed at 9:15 on the dot. And I want you to sit with that for a second, because most people assume that after 70, bedtime stops mattering, that sleep just becomes something the body handles on its own, quietly, in the background the way it always has. But that is not what the research shows, and it is not what doctors who actually study aging sleep patterns will tell you if you sit them down and ask. There is a specific window, a real measurable window, when the aging body wants to go to bed. And if you miss that window by even an hour or two, night after night, the consequences are not small. They show up in memory, in blood pressure, in mood, in how steady you feel on your feet the next morning. And today I want to walk you through exactly what that window is, why it exists, and why almost nobody is telling you the real reason behind it. Before I go further, if this is the kind of thing you want to keep learning, the biology behind the habits that actually protect your body as you get older, stick around on Smart Psychology. Because this channel exists to explain the reason behind the rule, not just hand you another list. And once you understand the reason, you never forget it. So let's start with a question, a simple one. The kind of question a curious mind never lets go of. The kind of question Richard Feynman used to ask about everything. Even the things everybody assumed they already understood. And his question was always the same. Why not what? Why does this happen? Why does it work this way? And if we ask that about bedtime after 70, the answer takes us somewhere most people never expect. It takes us into your brain, into a tiny cluster of cells about the size of a grain of rice, sitting just above where your optic nerves cross, called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. And this cluster is your master clock. It runs your entire 24-hour rhythm, your hormones, your body temperature, your hunger, your alertness, and most importantly for tonight's topic, your sleep. And here is the part almost nobody explains clearly. That clock does not stay the same as you age. It drifts, and it drifts in a very specific, very predictable direction. In your 20s and 30s, that internal clock tends to run a little late, which is why so many young adults are night owls. Staying up until midnight or later feels natural to a 25-year-old brain, but somewhere in your 50s and 60s, something shifts, the clock starts advancing, moving earlier, and by the time most people reach their 70s, the body's natural sleep signal, the point where melatonin rises and core temperature begins to drop, has moved forward by roughly 1 to 2 hours compared to where it's at decades earlier. This is called a phase advance. And it is one of the most well-documented changes in the entire field of sleep science. Researchers at institutions like Harvard Medical School and the National Institute on Aging have tracked this shift across thousands of participants, and the pattern holds again and again. Older adults naturally become sleepy earlier in the evening and naturally wake earlier in the morning, not because something is broken, but because the internal clock has genuinely moved. Now here is where it gets interesting, and here is where most people go wrong without realizing it. Because modern life does not respect that shift. We live in a culture built around staying up late. Television schedules, phone notifications, dinner plans that start at 7 and stretch until 9, and so a huge number of people over 70 are fighting their own biology every single night, forcing themselves to stay awake past the point where their body is practically screaming for sleep. And that mismatch, doctors call it circadian misalignment, is quietly connected to a long list of problems that most people never trace back to something as simple as bedtime. When you push your bedtime later than your internal clock wants, your body still wakes up at its natural early hour anyway, because that morning signal, driven by light hitting your eyes and cortisol rising, does not wait for you to catch up, so you end up compressing your sleep window, sometimes losing an hour, sometimes 2 night after night, and chronic partial sleep loss in older adults has been linked in multiple long-term studies to higher rates of falls, slower reaction time, weaker immune function, and a measurable decline in short-term memory consolidation, because deep sleep, the stage where your brain actually files away the day's memories and clears out metabolic waste through what is called the glymphatic system, happens disproportionately in the first half of the night. So if you are going to bed 2 hours later than your body wants and getting the same wake-up time, you are not just losing an hour of sleep. You are losing a disproportionate share of the exact stage of sleep your aging brain needs the most. So what do doctors who specialize in geriatric sleep medicine actually recommend? And I want to be precise here, Because the answer is not one universal number, it is a principle. And the principle is this: your bedtime after 70 should generally fall somewhere between 8:30 and 10 in the evening, with most sleep researchers pointing toward 9 as a strong evidence-backed anchor point for the average older adult. And I know that sounds early to anyone who grew up thinking of 9 as the middle of the evening, but remember, this is not an arbitrary number pulled from nowhere. It is derived from decades of tracking when melatonin naturally rises, and when core body temperature naturally begins its nightly drop in adults past 70. Dr. Charles Czeisler, who has spent much of his career at Harvard studying circadian biology, has described this shift in older adults as one of the most consistent findings in the entire field. And Dr. Michael Breus, a clinical psychologist known for his work on sleep timing, has repeatedly emphasized that fighting your natural chronotype, especially in older age, is one of the most overlooked drivers of poor sleep quality in this population. But the exact clock number is only half the story, and this is the part that separates people who actually improve their sleep from people who set an alarm to go to bed and still lie there staring at the ceiling for 40 minutes. Because bedtime is not a light switch, your body cannot go from scrolling on a bright phone screen to fully asleep in the span of 10 minutes. There has to be a runway. And doctors specializing in aging and sleep consistently recommend what is often called a wind-down window, roughly 45 minutes to an hour before that target bedtime, during which light exposure drops, screens go away, and the body is given a clear, consistent signal that the day is ending. Light is the single most powerful input into that suprachiasmatic clock we talked about earlier. More powerful than food, more powerful than exercise, more powerful than habit alone. And blue wavelength light, the kind pouring out of phones, tablets, and most overhead LED lighting, directly suppresses melatonin production by signaling to your brain that it is still daytime, and this effect becomes more pronounced with age, not less, because the aging eye actually lets in more blue light at the lens level due to changes in the lens itself, which is somewhat counterintuitive since older eyes often struggle to see fine detail, but they remain highly sensitive to this particular disruptive wavelength. So a phone scrolling session at 9 at night can genuinely delay melatonin release by 30 minutes or more in an older adult, pushing that entire carefully timed system later and later. There is another piece of this puzzle that almost never gets mentioned, and it is napping. Because a huge number of people over 70 nap in the afternoon without realizing that an afternoon nap directly borrows against the sleep pressure your body is building for that evening. Sleep pressure is a real, measurable biological force driven by a chemical called adenosine that accumulates in your brain the longer you stay awake. And by the time evening arrives, that accumulated adenosine is part of what makes you feel appropriately tired at the right hour. But a long nap at 3 in the afternoon can clear out a meaningful portion of that pressure, which means by 9 o'clock, your body no longer feels as sleepy as it should, even though the internal clock is still sending its usual signal, and this creates a strange, frustrating experience where someone feels tired all afternoon, naps to fix it, and then lies awake at night, wondering why sleep will not come. Doctors generally recommend keeping naps short, 20 minutes or less, and finishing them before 3 in the afternoon, so the nap restores alertness, without erasing the sleep pressure your evening bedtime depends on. Alcohol deserves its own honest mention here too, because a lot of people over 70 have a glass of wine or a nightcap out of habit, believing it helps them fall asleep. And in a narrow sense it does. Alcohol is a sedative. It can genuinely make you drowsy faster. But the sleep it produces is fragmented and shallow. Alcohol suppresses the deep restorative stages of sleep in the first half of the night, and then, as it metabolizes, often triggers a rebound effect that causes waking around 3 or 4 in the morning, unable to fall back asleep, which is precisely the opposite of what an aging brain needs. So doctors specializing in sleep medicine generally recommend finishing any alcohol at least 3 to 4 hours before that target bedtime, giving the body time to fully process it before the deep restorative window begins. Morning light matters here too, and it connects directly back to everything we have already covered. Because that suprachiasmatic clock does not only respond to darkness at night, it responds even more powerfully to bright light in the morning, and getting outside within the first hour of waking, even just standing on a porch or sitting by a bright window for 10 or 15 minutes, helps anchor that entire 24-hour rhythm. reinforcing exactly the earlier bedtime your body is already trying to move toward. So, in a very real sense, a good bedtime tonight actually starts with what you did with the morning light today. The system is a loop, not a switch you flip once in the evening and forget about for the rest of the day. If you are getting something out of this so far, do me a favor and hit like on this video. It genuinely helps this information reach more people who need to hear it. And if you know someone over 70 who struggles with sleep, someone you care about, someone whose falls or foggy mornings you worry about, send this to them tonight, because a 5-minute video might change something that years of frustration never fixed. Now let's talk about temperature, because this is a piece doctors bring up constantly. And most people have never connected it to bedtime timing at all. Your core body temperature needs to drop by roughly 1 to 2 degrees Fahrenheit to properly initiate and maintain deep sleep. And this drop is part of the same circadian sequence as melatonin release. They are timed together, which means a bedroom that is too warm can directly undermine even a perfectly timed bedtime. Sleep researchers frequently recommend a bedroom temperature between 65 and 68 degrees Fahrenheit for older adults specifically, because aging skin and circulation are somewhat less efficient at radiating heat compared to younger bodies. So the room often needs to do more of that cooling work rather than relying on the body alone. A warm bath 90 minutes before bed, oddly enough, actually helps with this rather than hurting it, because it draws blood to the surface of the skin, and when you get out, that heat radiates away quickly, causing a rebound drop in core temperature exactly around the time you want to be falling asleep. There is also the question of consistency, and this might be the single most underrated factor in the entire conversation, because doctors will tell you that an irregular bedtime, even one that averages out to a reasonable hour, does more damage to sleep quality in older adults than a slightly later but perfectly consistent bedtime. Doctors often compare this pattern to a mild nightly version of jet lag, and your circadian system thrives on repetition. It is at its core a prediction machine, constantly trying to anticipate what your body needs based on patterns it has learned. And when bedtime shifts by an hour or two depending on the night, whether there was a phone call, a television show, a grandchild visiting, that unpredictability confuses the entire hormonal cascade that is supposed to prepare you for sleep. Studies published in journals focused on geriatric medicine have found that older adults with highly variable sleep and wake times show measurably worse cognitive performance and higher markers of inflammation compared to those with consistent timing, even when total sleep duration was similar between the two groups, which tells you something important. It is not just how much you sleep, it is how predictably you sleep. I want to come back to something I said earlier, because I think it deserves more attention. The idea that comfort and convenience have quietly replaced biology as the thing dictating when people over 70 go to bed. We live in a culture that treats staying up late as a kind of freedom, a reward, something earned after a long day, and going to bed early gets unfairly labeled as boring or old-fashioned or giving up on the evening. But your suprachiasmatic nucleus does not care about cultural narratives. It does not know what time your favorite show airs. It only knows light, darkness, temperature, and habit. And every single night you override its signal in favor of a 9 o'clock drama or one more scroll through your phone. You are asking a 70-plus-year-old brain to do overnight repair work on a schedule that fights against its own biology, and over months and years that fight leaves a mark in memory, in balance, in mood, in the slow accumulation of inflammation that researchers now believe underlies much of what we simply call getting old. There is one more mechanism worth explaining, because it connects sleep timing directly to something doctors watch very closely in older patients, and that is nocturnal blood pressure dipping. In a healthy circadian rhythm, blood pressure naturally drops by about 10 to 20% during deep sleep, a pattern researchers call dipping, and this nightly dip gives the cardiovascular system genuine recovery time, reducing strain on the heart and blood vessels. But when bedtime is delayed and disconnected from the body's natural rhythm, that dip becomes shallower, or in some cases disappears almost entirely, a pattern doctors refer to as non-dipping. And non-dipping status has been associated in multiple studies with higher rates of stroke, heart disease, and cognitive decline in older adults, which means the simple act of going to bed at the time your body actually wants, rather than the time convenience dictates, is quietly protecting your heart and your brain every single night. This is also part of why doctors connect irregular or delayed bedtimes to higher fall risk, because blood pressure regulation and balance are deeply intertwined, and a body running on disrupted circadian signals often struggles more with the orthostatic adjustments needed to stand up safely in the middle of the night, which is exactly when many falls among older adults actually happen. So here is what doctors who study this actually recommend, distilled into something you can start tonight. Choose a target bedtime somewhere between 8:30 and 10 in the evening, with 9 as a strong evidence-backed default if you are unsure. Begin winding down 45 minutes before that time. Dim the lights in your home rather than relying on bright overhead fixtures. Put screens away or switch them to a warm, low-brightness setting. Take a warm bath or shower 90 minutes before bed if that fits your routine. Keep your bedroom cool, somewhere around 65 to 68 degrees, and above all, protect the consistency of that bedtime the way you would protect any other daily medication. Because in a very real sense, that is exactly what it is, a free, zero side effect intervention that directly supports memory, immune function, cardiovascular health, and mental clarity, and very few prescriptions on earth can claim that combination. I also want to be honest about something, because I think it matters. This is not about rigid perfection. One late night will not undo months of good sleep habits. Your body is more forgiving than that. The goal is not to panic if you stay up late for a birthday dinner or a phone call with a grandchild who finally had time to talk. The goal is a general pattern, a center of gravity that your bedtime returns to most nights, because it is the repetition over months, not the occasional exception, that actually reshapes how well your aging brain and body recover each night. If any part of this changed the way you think about your own evenings, or your parents or anyone in your life who is navigating this stage of life, subscribe here on Smart Psychology, because there is a lot more of this kind of explanation coming. The reason behind the rule, not just another list of tips you forget by tomorrow. And if you found this useful, leave a comment and tell me what time you actually go to bed, because I read everyone, and it genuinely helps shape what we cover next. There is one more thing worth saying before we close, and it goes back to that Feynman-style question we started with. Why does any of this matter beyond just feeling tired the next day? And the honest answer is that sleep after 70 is not a passive process. It is an active nightly repair operation. Your brain is clearing waste, consolidating decades of memory, regulating hormones that control everything from appetite to bone density, and your immune system is essentially recalibrating itself, and all of that work runs on a schedule set by that tiny cluster of cells above your optic nerves. A schedule that shifted earlier as you aged for a reason, because your body even now, even at 70 or 80, is still trying to take care of you, still trying to get you to bed at the exact time it needs to do its best work. And the only real question left is whether you are willing to listen to it, or whether you are going to keep fighting a clock that has already told you, quite clearly, what it wants. Take care of yourself tonight, choose a bedtime, and actually keep it. Dim the lights a little earlier than you normally would, and give your body the runway it has been asking for. This one change, small as it sounds, is one of the most well-supported things you can do for your brain and your body at this stage of life. It costs nothing. It requires no prescription, no appointment, no equipment, just a decision, made tonight and repeated tomorrow, and the night after that, until it stops feeling like a rule you are following and starts feeling like simply who you are, someone who takes their own biology seriously, someone who listens when the body finally speaks up after decades of being ignored. And if you found real value in this today, share it with the person in your life who needs to hear it most, a parent, a grandparent, a neighbor who gardens at dawn and stays up too late at night. Because sometimes the most caring thing you can do for someone you love is hand them a reason, not just a rule, a reason strong enough that they actually want to change. And that is what Smart Psychology is here for, week after week, explanation after explanation, until the things that quietly shape how we age stop being mysteries and start being choices we make on purpose. And I will see you in the next one.